listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I am Bob Schlehuber.
And I'm Jamal Thomas. Let's get ready to go against the grain. So today we're discussing the Democratic primary, the attacks leveled on Sanders by pretty much the entirety of the Democratic field, and of course the rise of Bloomberg. But before we get into these stories, we need to start here. This is the first episode of Political Misfits, so I think Bob and my producer Michelle all welcome you to the Political Misfits, the new home for the disgruntled and disaffected. Back in 2008, I sat perched on the side of the world as Obama was elected to massive fanfare and support. A new era in politics, Jesse Jackson crying, bawling his eyes out on the White House lawn. Hope and change beat the guy who wanted to stay in Iraq for 100 years. And just think, 8 years after that, Donald Trump is your president of the United States. I watched this perched on the side of the world as Obama made the argument that we need to look forward, not look back, after 8 years of a disastrous presidency of George Bush, where they invaded a country killing 1 million people, where they spent $8 trillion, where we spent 4,000 American lives, where we destroyed and destabilized that particular area of the globe. And again, the hope and the change, of course, being that Obama was going to be something fundamentally different. I watched as all of the enthusiasm for that particular president, to some degree, evaporated as he gave 95% of the income gains to the top 1%. I watched as he continued the drone bombings, the drone program, killing 90% civilians in some of the cases of the attacks. I watched the destruction of Libya. I watched as he made this argument that there won't be any boots on the grounds in Syria. Well, you found out he was paying terrorists in order to try to take down the government of Bashar al-Assad, a sovereign government. I watched these items. I watched as he threw himself to protect the bankers, while at the same token letting homeowners go bust. And then when it came around again for the next election, pushing for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, despite the fact that the overwhelming majority of the population was dead set and entirely against it. Even Clinton, who was supposed to be his second coming, was trying to run away from that particular deal. I watched as Obama used the Espionage Act to lock up whistleblowers, people bringing up issues of waste, fraud, and abuse. It's not to say that he was horrible through and through, but it is to make the point that the narrative and the opinion of the mainstream media in regarding Obama's presidency, or for that matter, the presidencies in general, gives it a pass. It's like our war criminals, for the most part, aren't as important as their war criminals. You can have a man that goes into a country, gets 1 million people killed, and he is now out finger painting. And we would wag our finger at the guy who throws a shoe at that particular president. The creation of ISIS, the creation of essentially the destabilization of that particular region of the world, all of those things were directly related to policy of the last president in office. And yet when Donald Trump gets elected, all of a sudden, hysteria. The Russians did it. They were working with Trump in Russia. And for 3 years, you had a conspiracy theory, for the most part, that they ran with whole hog. Every failure, every off thing that they would put out went in a very specific direction of being against Trump. Mueller comes in, does not do the job for him. Trump starts using the Mueller report for his own defense, making the point that you can't prove your case. Then we move to Ukraine. And keep in mind, during the entirety of all this, all of the main issues, the material concerns of the individuals within the context of our population gets outright either ignored or pushed to the side. Instead, the most important thing in the world is getting Trump out of office. What's important to note here is that the same people that were involved with giving Bush a pass on that attack on Iraq, or giving Obama a pass and going after the whistleblowers, or for that matter, even giving Obama a pass and allowing Bush to, for the most part, just walk, also want Trump impeached. When Pelosi is interviewed and Pelosi makes the argument, well, I knew Bush was lying, I knew he was full of it, and yet you still let him walk and thought it would be divisive to impeach the president. That did not in any way stop her from impeaching the president this time around, however. I'm making a point that as you're looking at American politics, there's a certain level of hypocrisy. Maybe even you can make the case hysteria that goes along with one party and their attacks on other parties, when in all honesty, there is a consensus in regards to the notion of either war and even from the standpoint of domestic economics, neoliberal policies. Profits are the greatest thing on the planet. Everything else is subordinate, with this kind of hand-in-glove approach between politicians and media that ignores certain narratives while at the same token pushing others. Did Donald Trump, is he defending the oil in Syria, or is he stealing the oil? When you have a situation where they come out with the narrative that tries to say Bashar al-Assad gassed his own people, and then you find out that there were leaks showing that this was somewhat staged and that the individuals involved in doing that investigation were being pushed in order to insinuate something that wasn't necessarily true. Again, I make the point, there was no consequences for the war in Iraq. You have a situation where Donald Trump gets up and makes the argument that the last president was responsible for the deaths of 500,000 people because he tried to institute a regime change war, something that the media class wouldn't necessarily own up to, and yet something that was absolutely flat fact true. You have a president, Donald Trump, instituting an assassination of Soleimani that could have literally dragged this country into a war, because understand, the moment that he kills Soleimani, that he invades Iraqi sovereignty in order to do that, it is out of Trump's hands in regards to what happens next. He could have instituted a large-scale war. The irony of this is that you would think that the material concerns of the individuals involved within the context of the country are hurt by sending them off to war, are hurt by dumping all of that money into the military budget, as opposed to actually dealing with material concerns. You would think that the public will be adversely affected by those things, but you wouldn't necessarily know that if you're watching mainstream media. There is a consensus on issues of war, on issues of policy, and you can see this clear as day when you're looking at Trump, the hypocrisy around the things that they're attacking Trump on, but they wouldn't necessarily attack Obama on, whether that's the destruction of Libya, whether that's going into Syria. Trump, to put it in perspective, makes an argument that we need to pull out of Syria, and what does the media do? Get outright hysterical that the only reason he's trying to pull out of Syria is because he's somehow being whispered into the ear by Vladimir Putin. This has been our media for the past 3-4 years, and it has gotten more and more onerous. It's gotten to the point where you have Democratic contestants who are talking about literally clamping down on quote-unquote disinformation, of course, disinformation being whatever they decide disinformation is. You have a Bloomberg, a billionaire, that has jumped into the presidential election. And that billionaire, the public, have become so disaffected, so disenchanted with the politics, so beaten down into this notion of deadening expectations, that they are willing to throw themselves at a billionaire in order to take out Donald Trump. We apparently have a racist president that's in office, and we're going to use another racist billionaire to get the other racist billionaire out. It's amazing some of the arguments that we've been seeing from the standpoint of media, from the standpoint of the Democratic Party, and even from the standpoint of this notion of war, peace, domestic policy. One of the clear things that we found is that they hate Sanders. And you can see media conform around the fact that they hate Sanders. One of the items that we're going to be talking about today is the attacks, not just on Sanders, but on his supporters, which is magnificent considering that you're talking about a multi-racial, multi-ethnic coalition, men, women, black, white, gay, straight, for the most part, just the country itself. And this, the media and the political class, finds to be problematic and disconcerting. Our job, my job, is to be the man on the wall, to, for the most part, get across stories and context in a way that the media, for the most part, does not go about explaining. When they want to cut their narrative, when they want to cut their story in a particular way, it is my job to sit on the moon and make the point of saying, well, wait a minute, there's a little bit more to the story than that. And is this person explaining it in this particular way because of this particular reason? I find that to be greatly important, especially with the events that are taking place around the world as we get a smaller world and we inch ourselves into situations that could drag us to the brink of war. Bob, what is, for me, the political misfit thing boils down to this notion that we are outside of a party dynamic, that we don't necessarily fit in either the red, we don't fit in the blue. And if I'm being honest, I'm somewhat antagonistic to the system as a whole in general. And I have that believing that media, for the most part, is also part of that particular political system. That instead of it being this thing that holds media accountable, or holds power accountable, it oftentimes is a factor of that power manipulated and used in that sense, and sometimes allows themselves to be used in that sense of creating and perpetuating certain narratives. To me, our job is to be the integrity, to be honest. And I understand we're going to get hit with certain Russia baiting and red baiting and everything else. But the question and the answer, or the thing that you need to really boil down to is what we're saying honest? Is what we're saying accurate? Reality, or from the standpoint of perspective, is not an absolute. And we can have different perspectives on various things, but at the very least, don't you want to hear the other perspective to give you a larger, wider context? That's, to me, what it means to be a political misfit. Bob, what's for you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, in so many ways, it's trying to think about how we can connect the interconnectedness of all the different parts here in Washington, D.C. as well. So often everything is it's Democrat, it's Republican, it's black, it's white. Well, things are very interconnected. I remember one time I always kind of joke about breaking the government. I was on at the Congress one day, and I was lobbying for the Department of Peace Building, a bill that Dennis Kucinich had put out and had been now promoted by Barbara Lee. And I went into my congressional office at the time, and I said, hey, can I talk to somebody about this Department of Peace Building? And they go, sure, you want our foreign policy person? But no, for peace building, we can do that at home here, like all the division in America, all the things that separate people, like how can we actually bring people together? I said, for example, like how does health work with nonprofit, work with business, work with the economy? The person goes, oh, you want our education person? Like, no, you don't understand. And I realized at that point, our government doesn't work across their divisions. They don't work across the ways in which people actually interact and live in a community. You go to a business, and then you maybe go to your kid's school, and then you bring your kid home. The politics is more than just politics. It's how people interact with the life around them, with the culture, with the economy, with society, with all of that collectively together. And so much of the media presentation, and I think that's why people tune into Radio Sputnik, is so focused on just kind of this horse race, corporate media trying to sell you products and goods. Well, we don't sell you products and goods here on Radio Sputnik, and I'm really proud of that, is that we come in and give you a filter that isn't the one that's so prescribed to corporate media that they have to fit within. And so I'm so excited to take our listeners on a journey to discuss how things are interconnected and how those play out in their lives and hear directly from them. And we'll also talk a lot about our firsthand experiences traveling in the United States and hearing different voters. So much of the media the last months here has just been impeachment, impeachment, impeachment. Well, I went to the debate in Miami. I went to the debate in Detroit. I've been in Iowa twice now, once in August and then one last week for the Iowa caucuses, which we can laugh at and be disgruntled about later. No one's talking about impeachment there. Nobody's talking about strictly politics there, right? It's not just about Republicans versus Democrats. People want to know where their next meal's coming from, where they're going to get health care, how they're going to pay their mortgage or possibly even buy a house, where their kid's going to go to school. Those are the issues that people here in Washington, D.C. don't talk about. They talk about how much money they can raise, how they can spin the news cycle to basically favor them and make it sound like they're not just raising tons of money from corporations, that they really care about the boogeyman Russia. These people care about raising money and staying in office. That's not what we care about on Political Misfits, and that's why we don't fit in until what you're going to hear on the rest of the stations here in Washington, D.C., or wherever you're listening in the world. You're going to hear us talking about issues that matter to you. And that's what I'm so proud of this show, is to take those voices that we so often hear, open our phone lines, 202-521-1320. We were intentional on this show being live in the middle of the day for people to call in just for that purpose, to give them a platform and a voice so they can feel like they fit in somewhere when they don't fit in. And I'm really excited to go on this journey and to continue with the Political Misfits here.
Essentially the Owl of Misfit Toys, or the political equivalent of the Owl of Misfit Toys. No, I agree with you. I think it's a big deal for us. I mean, look, I've been doing a show for a while, and for the most part, my show has been a media critic, has been a political critic, and making the basic argument that ultimately you have a two-party system that is really just one party. I mean, there may be things that they complain about from the standpoint of identity, but when you get down to the issues of economics and war, they're the same party. So my job, our job, is to call it out.
And they're the same people. I'm just laughing at when you had mentioned kind of this plutocracy that we live in. In 2017, right after the height of the Russiagate, Russia stole the election, Donald Trump, the most dangerous person to America of all time, what does Barack Obama do with less than a month after the most dangerous person, the country's under attack? He goes kite surfing with Richard Branson. Gotta be kidding me. And media is, oh, this is the most serious. If Barack Obama can go kite surfing, it's not that serious, people. Like, it's not, we're not under invasion. things are going to continue the way they are here. The guy's kite surfing. That's baloney. And nobody called bull on that. That's what's crazy to me. They're like, oh, that's totally cool. Kite surfing with Richard Branson, the former president everybody loves. There's
a lot of stuff they never called bull on. I mean, the Venezuela thing, when Obama came out and says Venezuela is a national security threat, and no one sits there and says, wait, how? Like, nobody raises their hand to say, how? For the most part, they say, okay, well, it's a national security threat. Just let it ride. It's amazing. Media takes a very specific perspective on this stuff, and it's an aggravating perspective. If you were sitting on the moon and you were looking at events, and as you were looking at events, you just called balls and strikes. You didn't necessarily have any affiliation with any of the parties. You just tried to be away from it and give the most honest, objective, contextual point of view that you could give. That is a political misfits.
Yeah, and you have Richard Branson here going kite surfing. Well, he owns radio stations and media going kite surfing with the former president. That shows the interconnectedness between these politicians and big corporations.
Absolutely.
It's trash. We got a lot more after this. Political Misfits, thanks for joining our inaugural show here on Radio Sputnik Live in Washington, D.C. We're back after this.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Tune in every Wednesday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker and John Kiriakou for a regular segment called Beyond Nuclear, where Brian and John discuss nuclear issues, including weapons, energy, waste, and the future of nuclear technology in the United States, with Kevin Camps, the radioactive waste watchdog at the organization Beyond Nuclear. Listen on Wednesdays right here on Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits, the show that goes against the grain. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am here with the indefatigable Bob Schlehuber, and we're discussing the profound events rattling, shaking the Democratic Party. Even after the train wreck dumpster fire, there was an Iowa caucus, there were still concerns, and that's to put it mildly, about the potential chaos in the upcoming Nevada caucus. A billionaire has qualified for tomorrow's debates. But first, and perhaps the most ludicrous of the stories of this election cycle, Bernie Sanders supporters are being attacked by the other campaigns in a clearly coordinated effort to malign his greatest attribute, the enthusiasm of his base. I think it's fair to say that even before Sanders took the double-digit lead in national polling, his supporters are the energy of the Democratic Party. That was true in 2016. That is that much more true in 2020. I could be running to the polling precinct during an alien attack, have my legs sheared off at the waist, but will still have the fortitude to drag myself bleeding on the flag to pull the lever for Bernie Sanders, just in case we're able to turn back the evasion and we're able to win. I want that peace of mind that Bernie Sanders is still going to be president in office as he corrects all of the damage from that attack. I think it's fair to say that that's not just me. That is a feeling that is shared by a multitude of people in this country, a multiracial, multinational, multi-ethnic, black, white, gay, straight, across the board, empirically so. Since winning New Hampshire, Sanders has taken a commanding double-digit lead in recent national polling, the most recent being NPR PBS Marist poll, which has him up 9 points to 31%. His next closest competitor, Bloomberg, is at 19%. And this is after them screaming and yelling that, oh, Bernie has a ceiling, Bernie has a ceiling. Doesn't look like it. The polling gives context to what you can see with your own eyes at these barn-burning political equivalent of rock concerts. 17,000 people in Tacoma, Washington last night, 10,000 in Richmond, California, 11.4 thousand in Denver, Colorado. The wind is clearly at his back. The public has started to view him as the most electable in the race, and there is a real, legitimate chance, according to Nate Silver and according to my own political prognostication, that he can run the table in the next primary states. How are they going to stop him? Now, with all of this wind at his back, with all of this momentum, there's a certain consternation in the party. And the party has started a new series of attacks. Not on Sanders. Not on Sanders. His supporters. They have started to attack his supporters. Again, despite empirically speaking, Sanders having the most racial and ethnically diverse coalition of any campaign in spades, the Bernie bro myth has been given new, desperate life, with various fledgling campaigns lumping in on the bandwagon since everything else they've thrown at him has failed. In Politico, Biden calls out Sanders over supporters' online behavior. I would tell you this. If you are crying on television about supporters saying bad things to you, you are going to lose the Trump. Let's hear Biden calling out Sanders.
Bernie Sanders is a guy who says he's going to support whoever's the nominee, and he's all in. Are you confident his supporters will do that, or are you worried that some of his supporters, and do you think if his supporters are attacking culinary union members, who's responsible for that?
Well, look, he may not be responsible for it, but he has some accountability. I'm going to not put you in a spot you don't have to. You know me well enough to know if any of my supporters did that, I'd disown them. Flat disown them.
He'd flat disown him, and you can trust Biden on that. That was Chuck Todd, by the way, the most oblivious man on the planet, Chuck Todd. And I love the way Chuck Todd leads into that question. I love, I disown him. You know me, Chuck. You know me, Chuck. Elizabeth Warren, flailing campaign, joining in. We're responsible for what our supporters do, and I think Bernie has a lot of questions to answer here, and I'm particularly worried about what happened in the attacks on members of the culinary union, effectively Warren burning the rest of her career and attacking supporters that she will need to get elected, even if it's just to doghouse. Even womanizing racist Michael Bloomberg gets in on it, launching a hit video basically calling Sanders' campaign or his people divisive. Just think about it for the moment. Bloomberg has slightly less money than God, has ruined hundreds of thousands of lives with rapidly racist and unconstitutional policies to terrorize blacks in New York, has argued that elderly people that get sick should just go and die without medical treatment, has a well-worn history of criminally vulgar and degrading language towards women, not to mention more sexual discrimination suits than Trump. But Sanders supporters saying bad things about us on Twitter and social media, that's the problem. Not to mention Joe Biden. Joe Biden gets on stage and lies flagrantly about being part of the civil rights movement, despite, back in the 80s, him owning up to the fact he wasn't a part of it at all. I find that to be a massive, big deal. This is the same guy who was on stage saying blacks can't take care of their kids, who's been lying about his record on the Iraq War, lying about cuts to Social Security. But no, the material needs and going against the material needs of the various people within the context of our party, that's not what's important. The fact that Sanders supporters are saying bad things about me, that's the thing that's important. And I'm not even going to go to Beth, who, for the most part, pretending to be a Native American for the past 40 years, but then turn around after appropriating that culture and not backing that culture up at Standing Rock. This is the same woman who's arguing that we should have a banana republic, and she wants to go after Trump. Again, after Mueller, after the Russiagate, after the Ukraine gate, now she wants, if she gets in office, which she is not, go after Trump. This level of pandering and attacks, not even at Sanders himself, but at his supporters. How sad. We are joined by Teresa Lundy, communications strategist and principal at TML Communications. Teresa, how are you today?
I'm well. Good to be here.
Excellent. You are here for our initial show, so I would like to welcome you to Political Misfits. Let me ask you this. I've watched all of this with a certain level of aggravation. And it does seem like the kitchen sink strategy up to this point hasn't necessarily worked. And so now we're going to dog his supporters. Why do you think they're attacking him on this very specific point? And do you think this particular attack has legs?
Well, I think what the attacks are looking like, it's because they see that a independent and a socialist agenda with Bernie Sanders is actually going to win the nomination. We've seen it time and time again. When the Democratic Party says no, they will put other obstacles in place. I don't believe that Bloomberg came by chance. I don't believe that rumor where Hillary Clinton was going to be his running mate was also by chance. I think it was a distraction. And so when we look at, some of the commentary and the amplification of his supporters on social media networks and personal attacks, via even inside of a mall, we need to start really looking at our democracy as a whole. And I need Bernie to kind of actually reinforce what he's actually running for and condemning some of these people a little bit harder than he's used to.
Now, I'm glad you said that. I'm so glad you said that. I have a clip with Chuck Rocha. Now, he's speaking with Joy-Ann Reid. Now, Joy-Ann Reid, famous for hating Sanders. This is the one with the time-traveling hackers that went back in time and said pretty homophobic things on her account. But Joy-Ann Reid gets on television, and she's talking to Rocha. And Rocha says this, because you hit upon something that's extremely good. Ultimately, Sanders has a tendency to show weakness on this issue. And he tends to apologize for things that he has no reason to apologize for. Let's hear the clip for Chuck Rocha.
Sanders has a record of doing that, and I think there is a lot of people out online, and I do believe it is all campaigns. I'll tell you that I have nothing but positive support from our supporters. I see them out lifting up the voices of people all across the country. But just like the senator said, we don't want anybody out there bullying anybody.
Now, why do you accept the premise? Meaning you have a lot of people who are disingenuous. And, you know, like the intro, I kind of made this point that all of the horrible, disgusting things that Bloomberg has said, I mean, whether it's the policies that he's been implementing, whether it's the things he was said, whether it's the things that Joe Biden was implementing when he was in office, I mean, adversely affecting the material situations of the people who are he's supposed to be representing. But language, that's the issue. And instead of Rocha pushing back on this, strongly pushing back on this, well, look, you know, all of these campaigns are out here. We have supporters who are energized and energetic. And, you know, you can't necessarily drag a few tweets out. We can all do that for all of the campaigns. We're not going to go after our own people for this. However, he needs to make this case. You don't make that case by hitting your strength in favor for people who hate you. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely agree. And I think if we, again, are trying to build on the narrative of unity and outside of the divide, well, the divide is coming from in-house and people are watching. So that's why I feel like a lot of people are kind of skeptical about who the next candidate is, who's going to bring together the country. When we're looking in-house at our own party and we're seeing, you know, the strife, we're seeing the discussions, even the commentators on the MSNBC, CNN, and everybody on Fox is saying, look at the Democratic Party and how dysfunctional it is. Tom Perez needs to do more, I think, at the highest level of the party in order to bridge the divide. Because something's going on with each of these candidates. I think he needs to maybe put some more fines or fees, something in place, or, you know, maybe even cancel a debate stage until they can get their house in order.
Yeah, I mean, the irony of Joe Biden, of all people, going out there and talking about people needing to disavow and disown certain people is wild to me. If you remember last week in the last debate, Tom Steyer had called out Joe Biden and said, are you going to apologize for what one of your surrogates said to one of my staffers in South Carolina, the guy, Democratic State Senator Dick Harpootlian, who was basically talking about in South Carolina, a person that Tom Steyer had hired. He says this is what happens when billionaires get involved, whether it's Donald Trump or Tom Steyer. They just buy things. They don't have to persuade anybody. They just buy them, which was a very insensitive statement. And what did Joe Biden on the debate stage say? Oh, I called the guy. I talked to him. He already apologized. He didn't disown it. He didn't fire him or any of that stuff. Get out of here. And then just within the last 24 hours, you have another surrogate for Joe Biden's presidential campaign who was, quote, forced to resign, in her own words here, from the Pennsylvania Young Democrats after promoting a doctored video of a fellow 2020 contender, Senator Bernie Sanders, for allegedly sharing anti-Semitic tweets about him for his online supporters. So you have several people that are actually connected to Joe Biden saying or doing things that are not appropriate, and Joe Biden not disavowing or disowning or doing any of these things to these people, but instead lets them stay on their campaign staff. So the hypocrisy is disgusting to see. And I guess the other thing, Teresa, that really frustrates me is that these are random online supporters that people don't know, who aren't officially involved with the campaign there. As Chuck Rocha, the senior advisor to the Sanders campaign, talks about, he also shares the idea that these people aren't affiliated with us. These are online people. These are supporters. They're going to have an autonomy to do what they want. The thing that frustrates me is the billionaires and the corporate executives that are destroying our planet, who donate big, big money to the Pete Buttigieg's of the world, to the Joe Bidens of the world. Those people are never criticized. Why is Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg rarely ever called out for the billionaire donors who are paying people less than fair wages, who are running slum-like conditions at some of their factories, who are destroying, like I said, the environment? None of those people are criticized. They're just accepted as, oh, big donors in the field of politics in America. That's just what it is. But it's these random people online who are no-name people. Those are where we're going to focus our attention.
No, I think that's interesting. I think that's also because, again, I'll go back to the Democratic Party's stance on how they feel about the candidate they want to support. Listen, I think, and it's been going around in other circles. If they don't get a Joe Biden or they don't, I think everybody's trying to look for their second pick. And I've been hearing rumors that Buttigieg might be that second pick. And if that's the case, then we start to see why they're not being punished, why they're not being ridiculed. And at the end of the day, they win. I will always say the people wins, but in this case, since they are the ones holding the nomination, they win. So in order for them not to win, we got to keep having these dialogues, we got to keep having these conversations, but also making sure that they're being brought to the table for the hypocrisy that they're bringing to everyone else.
Well, that was Teresa Lundy, a communication strategist and principal at TML Communications. Give us a call, 202-521-1320. We'll take your calls and much more after this break, including we take a look at Nevada's caucus right around the corner. Somebody said it's like the Iowa caucuses, but in a casino. Yeah, that's going to turn out real well for the Democratic Party. We're going to talk about that and much more after this break. You're listening to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. We're back after this. So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No, it's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show by any means necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with the indomitable Bob Schlehuber. We've been talking about attacks on Sanders, but I want to move slightly to discuss the upcoming Nevada caucus. Give us a call at 202-521-1320. That's 202-521-1320, or tweet us at Sputnik Misfits if you have anything to say on those topics or whatever else is on your mind. Let's keep it PG, but nevertheless, whatever's on your mind.
PG-13?
PG-13?
We do PG-13?
Ish?
Ish? Okay.
Ish.
That's fair.
We can do PG. Strong language, no cursing. How about that?
That's fair.
All right. So early voting has started for the Saturday Nevada caucus. To say the cracks are already beginning to show is to put it mildly. Now, I have a bet going that Jesus Christ will return before we ever learn the winner of Iowa. And as I see it, at least up to this point, that bet seems extremely safe. With that colossal failure in our rearview mirror, for the most part, we're in the shadow of that failure, you would think that Nevada would go off without a hitch, meaning you would think all powers, all energies that could be used at the disposal of ensuring Nevada happens without a quirk would be used. But that's, for the most part, asking for too much. That's too much like right. Listen to Seth Morrison. Now, Seth Morrison is the Nevada caucus leader. He's discussing his concerns about the process that are in place. Now, this is a week before the Iowa caucus.
It is accurate that we're not using an app per se, but we are using an untested software tool in the caucus room. And I do worry that the caucus process will be confusing and flawed.
Just in case you were concerned,
not gonna go
Bob.
well. It's not going to go well.
It's not a tool.
It's probably not going to go well.
It's not an app. It's not an app. It's just a software tool It's not an app. I love that.
What is a software? Is software tools an app?
It is literally an app.
Okay.
It is literally
Same
an app.
page
It is
here.
something that they have on an iPad that they are opening. They hit a button. It comes. That's an app by definition. That's an app by definition. And the catch is they don't necessarily want to call it an app because of what took place in Iowa. Also, it must be understood that the same app that they were going to use in Iowa, that they tried to use in Iowa, that failed completely and absolutely, was also the app that they were going to use in Nevada. So with 2 weeks shy of that, they, for the most part, had to come up with a new plan of action. And this is a new plan of action for processes that they never had in Nevada before. And this is going to be problematic. So let's hear, same gentleman, Seth Morrison. This gets worse because now he gets into his recommendation about early voting coming up. So let's do this.
Yes.
We have had a lot of training on the broad process. We have never seen or handled this tool.
Oh, wow.
They keep telling us as early as last night that we'll show it to you when it is ready.
So it's not ready a
that's
week out.
That's what the trainers have said as recently as yesterday.
Now, he's a company guy, so he's still going. He's going with the line. He's like, look, it's not really a tool.
Have I
it's
seen
not
a
really
computer?
an app, it's a
I've seen a
tool.
computer before.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
I don't know how to turn it on.
I don't know how this works.
Yeah, sure. We've seen a computer.
And then the beauty of it is, I guess my point is, he's making this case of like, look, this is going to be a problem. We don't have it. Because understand what has had to happen for this gentleman to come out and literally get on CNN and make that case. And the CNN reporter's like, wow, you mean it's untested? Yeah, it's untested. One more clip for this. Because, again, he's recommending early voting. And the catch here is that early voting is not necessarily entirely a silver bullet, meaning the thing that he's recommending is still has its own problems. Let's hear the last clip.
But what software is being used to tally? And think of all the permutations. I voted for A as my first choice. You voted for B, but A is not viable. So who's my second choice? So the permutations of all of this are complicated. And we don't know who developed that software.
Well, just so we're clear, the permutations are complicated. We don't know who delivered the software. Now, to give a slight backstory before we get to the calls, because we have plenty of calls on the line. Thank you. Hold on for just one moment. The caucuses are being done in somewhat of an odd way. Now, keep in mind, a caucus, you complain, you argue, you try to get people to convince them to join your side in a particular debate. So how does that work with early voting? How do you early vote if you're supposed to be there in order to fight, complain, and moan to try to get people to join your particular candidate? Well, the way they do it is ranked choice voting. Now, you would have to put in at the very least 3, your order of candidates who you want to support. If you don't put at least 3, they're going to get rid of your paper. It's going to go in the wastebasket. Now, you can put all the way up to 5, and it's going to be ranked choice voting. Now, they're going to put that into a box, apparently, and on the day of the caucus, they're somehow going to have to tally up all of those votes and all of those permutations, because keep in mind, not everybody is going to get the 15% threshold. So you might have all of these 5 different people. Okay, this person doesn't get the 15%. So now we're going to that person's second choice. And you have to get all of this done on Saturday, in addition to the typical caucus that you already have going on. To put it mildly, there are several choke points in this particular process. And as this gentleman, Seth, made the point, yeah, we haven't really had that much training and practice on this. And the only reason he's out here is because he's trying to sound the alarm. There's another gentleman. There are other people who have gone to the pre-registration or the pre-voting and have been in lines for 4 hours. Again, making the point that it doesn't seem that these people are all that much entirely aware of the processes to which they are going to use just less than a week away. Let's go to the phone lines.
We got a few different callers here. First, Colin from Charlotte, North Carolina. Colin, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I want to talk a bit about the Nevada caucuses coming up.
Go for it.
My friend, who I've known for quite some time, for a few years, he's worked with the Democratic Party for quite some time for some contractors for doing some tech work, has recently been called in to do vote counting for early votes in
Nevada.
I make that mistake too, so don't feel bad.
All right, so what's going on in Nevada, he's going to be counting votes, and My hope is I don't see a lot of I just hope that the votes, there's not going to be people like miswriting their votes, like voting for Bernie 3 times, and what they're supposed to be doing is Bernie, then unaffiliated the third time if they want to do that. But that's my main concern is the ballots are going to be, I'm just feeling that the ballots are going to be so messed up and it's going to cost the race. So that's my comment on it.
Yep.
Well, let's hope.
Colin, thank you so much for the call. We got a few more callers in here. Let's get these in, and then we'll get some of your remarks here. We have Chris. Chris, you also wanted to talk a little bit about Nevada. What are you expecting from this weekend's caucus? Chris, are you here?
Chris?
Yeah. Hey, sorry about that.
Hey, what's happening?
Well, first off, congratulations on your new show.
Thank you.
Big fan of Jamal and everything.
Thank you.
Big supporter. So, get that out of the way real quick. Thank you for your time. So I'm a hopeful Bernie supporter, but I'm a little jaded from the Democratic process. So I'm kind of thinking that, what happened in 2016, they're going to probably try to do something again and try to steal it from Bernie. So I'm thinking, even with the high turnout, voter turnout, even though that seems like what's going to happen with the Latino community, what do you think is going to? They're going to probably do something, right? You guys probably going into this thinking that there's something's going to happen because they already tried something with Iowa. They couldn't really do anything in New Hampshire because there wasn't a caucus, but this is a caucus just like in Iowa. So I'm just thinking like,
essentially, be aware. Be aware. I agree with you, right? I mean, look, after the context of 2016, and even from the standpoint of Iowa, I don't come away with this kumbaya. It's all incompetence, and there's no malfeasance associated with it. I think malfeasance or incompetence is often used as a dodge for malfeasance. So I don't doubt it. My path or my argument for path of winning is to win outright, meaning it has to be a crushing win because once you get around the edges and you get these kind of errors that come forward, those errors have a tendency to go against the candidate that is against the established norms. Bob?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of things that are actually going to happen this week that is absolutely bizarre to me. You're going to have a CNN town hall that's going to take place with the candidates that are in the debate tonight as well as on Thursday. You actually have a debate. You have the debate in the middle of voting.
Yeah.
Voting has started, and then they're going to debate halfway through. And then all this week, you're going to have polls coming out from Nevada ahead of the caucus when voting's already started. That's absurd.
Bloomberg is in the race, and Bloomberg is not even running in Nevada.
There are countries that literally have a media blackout a week, if not more, before the election. No polls are allowed, and nobody's able to talk about it because you want a fair democratic process, and you don't want corporate media putting their thumb on it. Best way to put your thumb on it, in the middle of voting, have a debate with Chuck Todd.
This is America, Bob.
Chuck Todd, the guy
America,
accusing
Bob.
Bernie Sanders supporters of being brown shirts, is going to have a platform with Bernie Sanders in the middle of early vote. What are we doing?
It gets worse.
Nevada? The
person who's, do you remember in 2016, they said Sanders was throwing chairs in Nevada? It was like, oh, his supporters were throwing chairs. They were throwing chairs. That guy is also helping Chuck Todd running the debate.
It's a mess. We got two more calls here. Chris, thank you so much for the call. We have Kane. Kane, you're talking about Nevada caucus with us. What's on your mind?
Yeah, so I want to say a good thing and then play a negative. A good thing is they are using Google Sheets. Now, a spreadsheet itself can actually be quite helpful when you do ranked choice voting. But you need to be a power user of spreadsheets. If you're not a power user, you're going to likely mess it up tremendously. It's going to be horrible. It's just going to be a freaking mess.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's going to be a problem. I mean, ultimately, look, Nevada hasn't necessarily done the ranked choice voting thing before. And look, I am a fan of ranked choice voting. I think it's valuable, especially if you're trying to unpry the two-party system thing. Oftentimes, you have this weirdness of the esoteric other, this thing in your head of, I'd vote for this person if I thought the other part of the population would vote for this person, creates this kind of weird pressure for you to vote against somebody who you might, against your own interests. Well, ranked choice voting kind of gets rid of that, where you could get to choose, all right, this is my main person, but if this person doesn't get it, then I'll pick this person, et cetera, and you can go down the line in regards to who you want. So I'm not against that. The issue is whether or not they're trained and whether or not they have the skills necessary to have this go off without a hitch. And I got to be honest, hearing the gentleman, Seth, he didn't necessarily seem like he was had a bias against the party. He just seemed outright and entirely, utterly concerned that Iowa is going to get part deux.
Yeah, it's coming.
Yeah, it's coming.
We have one more call, Tyrese. Tyrese, you're on the line talking about Bernie Sanders, the Democratic process, and the caucuses here on Saturday in Nevada. What's on your mind?
I want to talk about that, and also another comment I want to throw out there. Bernie Sanders, okay, he's getting a Jeremy Corbyn treatment.
Yes, he is.
And if they do that to him and cheat him, I think what he should do is him and, if he picked Torsi as his running mate, they should go independent. And also, by me being a Trump supporter, I try to look at everything everywhere, So what could help Bernie Sanders if he go after these large corporations that's giving jobs to illegals? Because when you do that, you're driving down the payment scale down, and you're giving jobs to illegals that are American citizens. Now, if Bernie Sanders make one of those things as his platform, even though we all know he's leftist, then what that's going to happen, that's going to take voters away from Trump. What y'all think about that?
So a few things. I agree with you with the Jeremy Corbyn treatment. I don't think they cheated Corbyn. I think Corbyn was just weak. I mean, if we're making the honest case, Corbyn had to understand that all sorts of forces were going to be allied against him and trying to take him down, including many of the elements of his own party. I agree with you, though, in the sense that you have the Blairites that were in the UK, but you have the Clintonites that are here. These people, for the most part, are the same, and they hate. They would watch Sanders sipping a Mai Tai, gurgling in his own blood if they had the opportunity to do so. So the last thing you should do is cater to people that hate you in lieu of attacking supporters that love you. And a lot of the attack pieces and going after supporters has a lot to do with their difficulty with trying to hit him and wanting him to, at the very least, hurt this aspect of himself that is one of his strongest features, meaning the enthusiasm. No other Democrat was able to put, 17,000 people in a stadium? And to do this all across the country. And mind you, he was doing this before they even took him as being the absolute, the one who has the best chance of winning the election. As for the quote-unquote illegals, look, I would argue that Sanders makes a very specific case in regards to we need a policy that works for all of us. And there's a reason why he has this kind of coalition, this working class coalition. If you look at the people who are giving him money, they're waiters, waitresses, people who work at Amazon, not the executives, but the people who are at the bottom of the scale. You have Hispanics. You have a multiracial, multi-ethnic coalition, men, women, etc., backing him. And part of the reason they're doing that is because at the very least they believe when he gets up in the morning that the thing that he cares about the most is ensuring that this country works for, quote unquote, all of us. Meaning representing the 99%. Do anybody in their right mind honestly believe that in the way Obama gave 95% of the income gains to the top 1%, that Bernie Sanders on his worst day would ever have a situation like that? The answer is no. I don't necessarily think you need to attack quote-unquote illegals, if you're going to use that term, in order to make that work. I do think you need to make an argument about shipping jobs overseas. I do think you need to make an argument about these trade deals, things like the TPP or this new NAFTA and these other policies that cater to corporations. The issue that Trump is going to have in this election, if he's running against Sanders, is that Trump is a faux populist. He's a blue-collar billionaire that, for the most part, was able to get to the left of Clinton just because she had moved that far to the left. That far to the right. He's not going to be able to do that with somebody like Sanders. I think that's somewhat of a problem that he's going to have, which is probably also why he thought that Sanders was going to be his most stiffest competition.
It's interesting the caller talking about quote-unquote illegal immigrants. That's not the path Bernie Sanders is going to take. He's not going to go after corporations for their hiring. He's going to try to find ways in which those workers can keep their jobs and help those people unionize and organize with black workers or other low-income workers. That's going to be his strategy. If you have your labor market is organized and unionized, you can fight for things. If they're not, and they're basically having these corporations allow for people to get paid under the table, never actually bring them into some type of formal process, then that's the way corporations can divide the workers from one another. It's kind of interesting to hear somebody that did vote for Donald Trump frame it one way, where if you just kind of flip it just a quarter inch the other way, it's a completely different fight. You can take on the corporations and do this thing versus take on the corporations and do this other thing that's, in my opinion, less humane, that we're calling people quote unquote illegal, especially people that have been here for decades on end, for ways in which the United States blowback wars have forced them to flee their home countries to come to the United States in the first place, and for people that are in jobs that they've clearly shown American workers will not work. Go work an agricultural job getting paid on the pennies for pounds of crop that you've picked all day, and find another American that's going to work that. And they're the demonized ones in our society. So it's interesting that those are the people that, like the caller said, he is somebody that wants the labor force to be addressed, to be equalized, to have everybody having a fair kind of system so people don't get cheated. But the fix is like trash the people that are here undocumented, who are barely making enough to survive,
kick the people
or try to find a way to work with them to see them as somebody going through the same plight, and you can both better your lot. I think that's what Bernie Sanders, it's a complicated message in many ways. It's much easier to say, no, we hate them, they're bad, they're taken away from you. And I think that's what Trump really resonates with a lot of people that are really suffering, that don't understand where their piece of the pie is. And if he simply says, your pie is over here, they took it, that's the bad guy, as opposed to like, no, I ate the whole pie and I threw it on the ground in a fit kind of thing. That's why you're not getting fed. I do want to get your thoughts here on Nevada before we take our next break at the 1 o'clock hour to talk more about the opioid lawsuit coming down in New York over the next month here in the Payouts. So give us a call, 202-521-1320. The new poll out from Nevada nationally, is Sanders up by 12 points. And I think that is going to have an impact on Nevada. Seemingly, he is the front runner going now into the caucuses. I don't know, I'm like hesitant to say front. He won the first two races, and I'm like brainwashed by the mainstream media to be like, maybe he's got a chance in Nevada to like do well.
Chuck Todd is like, how is he the front runner? Can you
That's
imagine
crazy, and
that?
that like
That's
permeates
mind-blowing.
my brain of somebody of like, I think I can say that, which he seems like now that he's opening up a lead. Mike Bloomberg is not in the race. For a lot of people, he'll be the number one target. But the new national poll, Jamar, that jumped out to me is under 45 years old. Sanders polls at 54%.
Dominant.
Warren at 16%. Bloomberg at a mere 8%. He hasn't jumped in the race yet, so those numbers will change once he's on the debate stage tomorrow night. But if you're looking at how to win a political campaign in the United States, or if you're somebody that's ever said, man, it's the younger generations, or it's more for my kids, how am I going to leave this planet? Well, then listen to your kids. Your kids can vote now, so listen to them. That number sticks out to me because you'll need that younger populace to get out the vote, to door knock, to campaign. That's where a lot of that sweat and energy, obviously retired folks will be a big part of that as well. And Sanders leads amongst them as well now that Biden's continuing to drop. But that big number amongst under 45 for me is what really stuck out in this latest poll.
That is so dominant. Like, that is dominant to a level that is breathtaking. I mean, even the Hispanic population, I mean, among Hispanics in Nevada, Sanders has taken 35% to Warren, 16% to Buttigieg, 50%. This is the new poll that came out in Nevada. Essentially, he is almost lapping the field, doubling the field. And then you look at the Hispanic vote, he's at 64% of the Hispanic vote, with Steyer being 8%. Like, these numbers are so dominant. These numbers are so dominant. You had a situation where Clinton, when she was running in the race, she was guzzling hot sauce and breakdancing with Mary J. Blige. And you had this thing where, you know, trying to hit Sanders as being the quote-unquote white candidate and having media run with that narrative of him being the quote-unquote white candidate. And then you still have some people try to push that narrative now, today, which, again, shows this kind of lack of credibility that media has. It's almost as if they're trying to tell you their hopes as opposed to telling you the actual reality of events. This is an amazing number. Even among whites, Sanders is able to pull in 28%. My point is, among Hispanics, whites, even African Americans, especially under the age of, let's say, 40, he dominates. He dominates. And so I can understand the kitchen sink approach that they're trying, and at this point they're trying to go in after his supporters, which, again, I'm not buying has legs. The only way this has legs is if he, for the most part, caters to it and validate their, you know, the disingenuous argument of disingenuous people attacking his particular supporters.
Yeah, I just have to, again, we're always kind of skeptical of polls here. If you've been a fan of Radio Sputnik over the last few years, especially heading into the last presidential election, we were calling bull on a lot of those polls that came out that had Hillary Clinton trouncing Donald Trump in basically everywhere that she thought she was going to win and other places. And so I just laugh anytime I see polls now. Point blank political. What are you doing? Tom Steyer leads a tight race in Nevada Democratic Caucus. That's where poll comes out. Tom Steyer is leading this poll, and they actually had the audacity, point blank political, to put out a poll thinking Tom Steyer is going to win the Nevada primary. It's mind-boggling to me that these companies exist and people are like, oh, that's interesting news.
I agree with that, with one exception: trends. I fetishize trends. When I've made this case before, and I've been absolutely right in my prognostication of this stuff. My wife is like, that's not a word. Yeah, it is a word, prognosticator. Basically, I've made this argument that trends are the things that matter. Yes, you have specific numbers. That's one thing, fair enough. But when you start looking at trends over the course of the United States, so you have like Biden leading with the elderly, Biden leading with African Americans, Biden leading on his argument of electability. And my argument was always, when a trend breaks, that's when you start seeing movement in the election. When Biden trend broke this notion that he was the most electable, he collapsed. Same thing with Warren. When this notion of her being the most trusted, or people thought she was being disingenuous, what happened? She collapsed. Those trends matter, even if the specific numbers themselves could sometimes be a little dodgy.
We have another caller on the line. Nick, you got a question for us?
Yeah, I was wondering if, say, Bernie Sanders, of course, he's got this great momentum going, and the establishment's going hard against him as pretty much at all costs, seemingly at this point. Say he is not able to win the nomination. If Bloomberg is probably the most viable candidate for the establishment, do you think Bernie Sanders would back him like Hillary Clinton?
No. Now, I could be wrong on that. I mean, it depends whether they can bend him into form, maybe. But Bloomberg just seems so onerous to me. Look, I think a few things happen if Bloomberg takes it. Ultimately, I think you destroyed the Democratic Party for almost a generation. Now, the reason I say this is you have all of these enthusiastic supporters of Sanders. Like I said, well, in the middle of an alien invasion, they could be sheared off at the hip and would still drag their body with a blood stain behind it in order to put that vote for Sanders. That is a certain amount of enthusiasm, but that enthusiasm can also turn into hatred if they feel that you cheated their guy. Because the support for Sanders is not necessarily entirely just cerebral. There's also an emotional component to it. If any of you have ever been to one of his events and you have all of these people there, and it's almost like you're at either a rock concert or a religious experience or some quasi combination of both, and the things that he's espousing and the things that he's saying, this is not platitudes. He's getting up there just talking about policy. And you have people who, for the first time in their lifetime, they're hearing somebody articulate strongly the things that they themselves, full bore from flesh to bone, believe. That is a religious experience. And it's one of those things that if you're going to rip it away from those people, you are going to have issues. I mean, look at the black vote and the Democratic Party, where you had for a generation, African Americans, for the most part, wed themselves to the Democratic Party to the tune of, like 90% on a bad year. You have a situation where the youth vote has now started to look around and started to question. But the elderly vote, for the most part, has stayed in ideological alignment. Well, what happens when you have a youthful generation that hits the same skids because they believe that you didn't cheat them once, you cheated them twice, and they believe that you, for the most part, are irredeemable?
Yeah, it's really interesting, too, to think about ranked choice voting. If that goes wrong, and then all of a sudden ranked choice voting is slammed, which a lot of people in the left and progressive circles really like. If you remember from Iowa, you're basically having to caucus in a large room with other people, and that will happen in Nevada. So you gather with other people at your precinct. This is where you would traditionally vote, and you have to go to a different segment or part of the room with said candidate that you support. Once you're all in the room, in your space, they count the number of overall people in the room. So if there's 100 people in the room, you then have to be what's called viable for your candidate to make the second round. I know you're saying, why don't they just vote for somebody one-on-one and be done with this process, Bob? And I say, yeah, I know. I don't know what to say. So anyways, they continue to go through this elaborate process. If your candidate has less than 15%, so they have 14 of the 100 people, your candidate is knocked out and is no longer viable. And then you have the option to go to a second person, so your voice is still heard, and that somebody else that may have had less people the first round now can gain additional supporters. Yeah. And so this is where the ranked choice voting comes in with early voting, is you have to rank your first, second, and third person on your paper ballot if you're not able to actually caucus on Saturday when it takes place. And so this way, ranked choice voting comes into effect and will be kind of the first time that it has a national platform. If it falls apart and Bernie gets cheated and ranked choice voting gets dirtied in the process, a lot of people are going to be real upset on a few different fronts, both on the mechanism as well as the candidate. Yeah, it's going to be a mess, in my opinion. You already heard from other people saying the same thing in Nevada. Thank you for all the calls here in the first hour. We got a whole nother hour with you after this break. You're listening to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. on Radio Sputnik. We're back after this.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamarl Thomas. Well, thank you for listening to our first ever live broadcast here in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. Wherever you're listening, anywhere in the world, give us a call, 202-521-1320. We're excited. I don't know if excited is the right word. We're continuing to talk about the Nevada caucus coming up. I'm excited because they're finally voting. We've been talking about this thing for a year on end. It's going to be a mess, and despite the mess that's going to come from Nevada over the weekend, I am still excited for it. I'm excited for the whatever 10th debate. I think the 10th debate tomorrow night in Nevada. A lot to shake out with Democratic politics. We're talking about that, but we also wanted to talk about some of these latest reports about the payouts from the pharmaceutical industry to help cover the cost of dealing with the opioid crisis. They're getting smaller and smaller. Many people will predict that the payout to these lawsuits will be even smaller than what was paid for during the big tobacco lawsuits in the 1990s. The New York Times reports today that lawyers for the plaintiffs in the opioid trial set to start in New York next month say that the payout is likely to be less than half of what the four big tobacco companies agreed to pay more than 20 years ago in a landmark settlement with states over cost associated with millions of smoking-related deaths. Whatever the final amount, it will certainly fall well short of what the public health experts say is needed to heal the long-term effects of the opioid crisis. Here to talk about the opioid crisis on its impacts on politics, we're joined by Eleanor Goldfield, founder and host of the show Act Out and co-host of Comment Censored podcast along with Lee Camp. Eleanor, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, and congrats on your new show.
Thank you. Thank you. And joining us on our first ever show, we're greatly appreciative of you. We're talking about that tobacco settlement in comparison to this opioid settlement that will play out over the next months here when it goes to trial in New York. The settlement in 1998 totaled more than $206 billion over 25 years. And Joe Rice, the chief negotiator for thousands of cities and counties suing the pharmaceutical industry, who was also instrumental in the tobacco settlement, conceded in an interview, people would say I was crazy if I thought we could get over $100 billion. Eleanor, the opioid crisis has rattled so many communities across America. I know you've been on the front lines and visited a lot of those different communities in your journalism, and how that then plays into the politics of the time. And people just seemingly are just heartbroken, have nowhere to go, and have removed themselves from electoral politics when so many of their own families and their own communities are in crisis mode given the opioid epidemic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was recently, late last year, I was in West Virginia, and the opioid crisis is perhaps at its peak in West Virginia. Of course, that makes perfect sense when you look at the main drivers of addiction, which is pain, either physical or emotional, and isolation. And folks in West Virginia, you know, a lot of them work in physical jobs, including coal mining or fracking or other physically intense jobs. They have a lot of pain, and they don't have the recourse to, you know, take some sick days or go get some physical therapy. So they get handed this magical little pill. Hey, this will take your pain away, and then you can get back to work and stop being so lazy and needy. And then they do that, right? And then, of course, when that's shrouded in this sort of magical story that, oh, it's not addictive at all, and then they just keep taking it, and it's gotten to the point where in West Virginia, 1 in every 400 people have died. You know, West Virginia is the second most rural state in the nation, and it has population, less than the borough of Brooklyn in New York City. About 1.8 million people live in West Virginia, and it's absolutely devastated the communities there. And Big Pharma can just look at it and shrug and be like, not really our problem. Which is, this article that you guys are looking at says much the same thing. Like, unlike with cigarettes, it's much more difficult with opioids, because they're coming from pharmaceutical companies that do a lot of good and have a lot of other products. So we can't really just say, oh, it's all Big Pharma's fault. Another thing they claim is that these medications pass through a lot of, or should be passing through a lot of gatekeepers, and that the Food and Drug Administration and the DEA should have been on top of this. And I agree with that. But all of that does is highlight how Big Pharma has captured these agencies. One of the terms we hear of is the term of captured agencies, and how agencies just kind of rubber stamp big industry to do whatever they want. And that has of course been the case with opioids. I mean, government should have stepped in immediately and put a stop to this. But that also doesn't mean that opioid companies like Purdue can just claim that they didn't know any better, or that in the case of Purdue, for instance, the Sackler family, they've claimed bankruptcy, and they're now in bankruptcy proceedings, while at the same time the Sackler family has been fettering away some $1 billion into Swiss bank accounts. So they're going to be fine, while they have the blood of thousands, hundreds of thousands on their hands.
Yeah, and the frustration that I have with so many people over the last few years is this conversation about how the government, we talk a lot about the crack epidemic in major urban U.S. cities throughout the 80s and early 90s, and people say now this is kind of a similar situation where these drugs have flooded the markets. And a lot of people will say, oh, now people care because it's affecting white people, as almost a way in which to kind of divide people that have been afflicted by low-income drugs flooding markets. But then you actually look at, well, who actually cares? Maybe it gets some press attention, maybe some media attention, but the U.S. government is hardly putting any money towards addressing the opioid crisis. If anything, Donald Trump gives a speech a couple years ago, talks about how they're going to have a balance of some $56,000 in the Public Health Emergency Fund, which works out to be 2 cents for every person afflicted by opioid addiction in the United States. And then so much of their plan was to basically increase treatment centers for opioid addicts. But if you actually study what happens to opioid addicts, they're not actually seeking the treatment, let alone consistently going. Those who need it the most don't have access to even getting the treatment in the first place. So the government clearly doesn't care, and they're obviously complicit in how much money they take from all these big pharmaceutical companies, while, like you said, pharmaceutical companies are claiming bankruptcy after they've hidden billions of dollars behind them. And so at the same time, it doesn't feel like anybody cares about these people either, but there's a facade to care, and that seemingly has kind of slowed the momentum to addressing the problem itself.
Absolutely, and I think while throwing money at this problem would do some surface good, just like with other issues that we face in this country, you have to dig deeper. And at the core issue is the fact that our healthcare in this country is based on profit. It's a for-profit system, which allows Big Pharma to set these atrocious prices on drugs and allows them to flood the market, allows them to do direct-to-consumer advertising. So the core issue is really how we treat healthcare in this country, that it's not a human right, but that it's something between clients and providers, which is so sick. So really what needs to happen is a fundamental shift in terms of universal health care and treating people with health care who need it. And also part of that is decriminalizing drug addiction. A lot of people go from opioids to using heroin and things like that, and we need to decriminalize that and treat drug addiction of any kind, whether that be something you go to a pharmacy for or you go into an alley for, treating these issues as a public health issue and not treating it like, oh, you're a failure, which is another problem with the opioid crisis, right? And as you mentioned, this is another reason why people aren't seeking help, because they feel that they've failed somehow, and that the sort of culture around addiction is that it's your mistake, as opposed to you live in a society, like I mentioned with West Virginia, that says, oh, you just have to keep working, shut up and take this pill and go back to work, as opposed to really caring about the well-being of people.
It's odd on a few points, because I agree with you. We have a capitalistic incentive that runs all throughout our society itself, whether that's the McDonald's that's across the street, whether that's the Burger King, whether that's Wendy's, Hardee's, et cetera, et cetera. You have all sorts of fast food places. And Nobody in their right mind believes that if you have a burger made by pink slime because the company wants to save profit, that that's not going to have some kind of adverse effect on the individual going later on in life. You have the same thing with cigarettes. You can go down the line and find all of these things that are based entirely on this notion of profit and the negative repercussions of that. Then you have a situation where you have a company whose entire point is, how do we make as much profit as possible? And if that company is putting out drugs, wouldn't every incentive in the world go for that particular company to put out those particular drugs to maximize their profit? But I want to hit a secondary point on this also, having to do with people who actually do need the meds. Like, we've gone to the point of criminalizing doctors, and doctors have gotten to the point of being sketchy about prescribing medication that people actually need. Because, look, just because you have some people who may abuse these medications and you have some companies that may flood the market with these medications doesn't necessarily, in fact, mean that everybody who's taking them is some kind of drug addict. You have a lot of people who are taking medications because they are in pain, and they are getting lumped in this kind of weird way with this assault on the drug companies itself, as opposed to the capitalistic incentive of maximizing profit with those drugs. Does that make sense? It's a little bit of both kind of going along the same thread, but because we've decided as a society to just attack the companies and not necessarily dealing with the underlying issue, you have this thing of putting pressure on people who actually need those medications.
Yeah, you make a great point. I mean, when I was in West Virginia, I was talking to somebody who he'd been suffering from extreme migraines for a couple of years, and he'd gone to the doctor several times, and they refused to give him anything because they were afraid to prescribe painkillers, even ones that were not.
Sounds like Eleanor dropped there, but talking about those side effects and then the other drugs people turn to when they can't use the opioids, the federal government estimated in 2018 there was more than 10,000 people who died of meth-related drug overdoses from the previous year. In California, the number of meth-related overdose deaths rose by 127% from 456 in 2008 to 1,036 in 2013. So that's one of the unintended consequences of cracking down on the opioid and not addressing what's the underlying issue of why these people are using it. They turn to fentanyl, which is like 50 times more powerful. Yeah. That can, I mean, just so many. Mac Miller, the famous rapper who died of that overdose, and other people. And then there was another article talking about the increase on the foster system, that all of a sudden you had all these people that parents were addicted to opioids and you could no longer actually be able to raise your child. And now the foster care system, which is already undervalued, underfunded and stuff, has more stresses to it. So just these kind of ways in which we don't think about how it ripples across society. I know Eleanor's back on the line. We also have Tim, who's been waiting patiently to get on the air. Tim, we're talking about quite a range of different things. So what's on your mind today?
Well, actually, since you were just talking about the opioid crisis, I'd lived in Massachusetts for 3 years, just a couple of years ago, and it is rampant out there. It is rampant in New Hampshire, in Massachusetts. That whole area is just soaked with it. And I'm from New Mexico. I'm back here now, and I was just and this place used to be the heroin capital of the world. That's where all of the heroin was getting into the U.S. But now, you know, this place is, you know, practically clean. But now you see the opioid crisis, you know, hitting all of these other parts of the country, and you see that the, you know, outside drug dealers are not getting the money. Inside drug dealers are making the profits now. So, you know, it's just a matter of degrees of separation between illegal drug dealers and legal drug dealers. And, you know, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's quite incredible. I mean, you just think about the usage difference. You can roll in a sheet of paper a tobacco plant, and you can smoke it freely down the street. But in many states, if you put a little bit of marijuana in that, you can lose your right to vote. You can go to jail. You can be harassed. You can lose your job. You can lose your children. You can lose access to public housing. I mean, it's amazing, just the simple difference. They're both plants with the tiniest difference, altercations of what is legal, illegal, and who actually makes those decisions and how that trickles down to people.
And mind you, half of the country, like meaning depending on the state that you're in, even though it's still the United States. And you have, half of the country that for the most part can legally use pot. You can be locked up, put in a cage by an alcoholic cop that sees no weirdness in the fact that he's an alcoholic putting you in prison for smoking pot. It's so bizarre.
Yeah. Eleanor, how do you, I'm curious how you think any of the presidential candidates or the current president of the United States can actually look to address these issues in the communities that you personally have been to and talked to people? What is it that would best kind of slow the epidemic?
Well, I think I can pretty much say that the current president won't do anything about it, but a potential president could do a lot about it. And Bernie Sanders has put forward this universal health care, also known as National Improved Medicare for All bill, which addresses some of these core issues. The fact that, again, health care is a human right, and as you've mentioned here, the drug war is a huge part of this. The fact that the Sackler family has buildings named after them in museums, they are the drug dealers of all drug dealers, right? And meanwhile, predominantly black and poor kids are thrown in jail for life for selling basically a plant. And these are all interconnected issues, which is another aspect of what we need to look at. This, like I mentioned, the decriminalization of this, it's very much tied to the drug war and the prison industrial complex as well, and the militarization of police, particularly as occupying forces in these predominantly black and brown communities. So those are all issues that have to be addressed in order to really address the opioid crisis. And at the same time, you have to address those underlying issues as well in places like West Virginia, where people aren't making a steady wage so that they can't support themselves, where they are isolated and forgotten and dealing with physical and emotional pain. These are all issues that need to be addressed as well.
So we have a caller on the line, but before we get to the caller, we have Jim Garrison. Congrats on the new gig, JT. Thank you, Jim. We also have Garden. Thank both of you. We also have Adam, who wants to talk about drugs. He's in Michigan. Adam, welcome to the line.
Hey, thank you very much for taking my call. Congrats on your new show. I'm honored to be a part of it. All right. In direct connection to this whole idea of for-profit above people, I'm currently active duty, so there's the whole disclaimer. This is my personal opinion, is that the corruption of money also is in the military with an item called Disuvia, which is a sufentanil that was pushed through the Pentagon very quickly. I encourage everybody to look at it. And so now it's essentially in the hands of soldiers to use as a painkiller, but there are so many other reviews of the product, scientific and medical reviews, that really discourage use of this product. However, it's out there now, and it's not going to hit the news until soldiers start dying from it.
Yeah, that's shocking. We will take a look at that and much more. We're going to take a quick break before we come back with Eleanor Goldfield. Hopefully more of your calls. What do you think about Mike Bloomberg? I'll leave it at that. 202-521-1320. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik Live in Washington, D.C. We're back after this.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits, where we are not afraid to go against the grain. Hopefully you are not either. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamarl Thomas. We've been talking about the opioid crisis in America and whether the pharmaceutical industry is going to get off without having to pay for the damage it's done. Spoiler alert, they do. But speaking of getting in the way with doing terrible things, this weekend we got some more insight into the things Michael Bloomberg likes to say to his female employees, and wow, to say the least. The Washington Post reported over the weekend that in 1990, an employee cataloged a bunch of these vulgar, demeaning, and sexist statements into a joke book called The Wit and Wisdom of Mike Bloomberg. This book was 32 pages long, Jamal, and unfortunately, we can't repeat a lot of what was in this on air. PG-13, we said. It's not that funny. It's not really a joke book. It's just disgusting things a rich dude said. They're not good jokes. They're not dirty jokes. They're just really inappropriate things to say whatsoever. He makes a few jokes along the way about how women are only good for sex, saying once that now his new terminals could also perform sex acts, they will put a lot of you girls out of business. Other examples include, how do you motivate someone? Simple. Are they addicted to 3 meals a day? On his code of ethics, the first rule is don't leave the toilet seat down. Great Bloomberg insights also from Bloomberg. If women wanted to be appreciated for their brains, they go to the library instead of Bloomingdale's. Well, some women can do both, Jamal.
And
stuff about women wanting to get whistled at, walking past construction sites, etc., and other comments bemoaning that female employees would dare get pregnant and want to take maternity leave all made their way into this book. Eleanor Goldfield continues to join us. She's the founder and host of the show Act Out and co-host of the Common Censored podcast along with Lee Camp. Eleanor, I guess I'm somebody that argues that Bloomberg's money will only get him so far. It's going to buy him a lot of name recognition, but these sexist comments, the comments on redlining, blaming Barack Obama for segregation in the United States, for the stop and frisk comments, and the number of people that have supported. I mean, Muriel Bowser, the mayor of Washington, D.C., has the same stop and frisk policies still active in Washington, D.C. right now. Whistleblowers from the police department came out a month ago and said, we are police officers. They're telling us to focus and target on minority populations and do jump outs, which is what Bloomberg's getting in trouble for when he ran that system in New York a decade ago. And yet he's still bringing people onto his campaign that are doing the things he's apologizing for. So I said all of those things added up, Eleanor, would be the downfall of this man. But yet he's continuing to rise in the polls. Where do you see the Bloomberg candidacy playing out here?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think basically what you just said is kind of the cornerstone of our two-party, basically one-party system. You know, I think it was, I can't remember who said it, but about a week ago somebody pointed out, so you've got Trump, who's a billionaire who used to be a Democrat, and then you've got Bloomberg, who's a billionaire who used to be a Republican. I mean, is basically just the poster child for our system right here. And I think, you know, Trump and Bloomberg have a lot of things in common. Obviously, their rampant sexism and racism is another shared trait there. And I think that, however, unlike Trump, who there's nothing bad you could really say about him that would actually hurt him, Bloomberg could be hurt by this because he still is supposed to be the alternative, and he doesn't have the populist support that someone like Trump does and did have in 2016. So I think it will hurt him. The question is, does the Democratic Party care? Because obviously if they cared what the people actually want, then they wouldn't have put someone like Bloomberg up on the stage and up there to try and take over the populism that Bernie is generating. So the real question isn't what the people want. The question is what the Democrats want. And the Democrats seem absolutely fine with somebody like Bloomberg because they're fine with somebody like Biden, who is also sexist and racist.
You know, I have two minds of this because I agree with you on this. I guess the question becomes, Bloomberg is now going to be on the stage. There is no reason at all that Tom Perez, at the very least, I don't think it's a legitimate reason for him to change the rule set after having all of those other people being excluded off the stage and then to change it to allow Bloomberg on the stage. By the same token, this could turn out to be one of those things that works to the benefit of somebody like Sanders and the other people in the race. I mean, ultimately, Bloomberg has just been out there doing ads in states that other people have not necessarily all that much invested time in yet. So the question becomes, can Bloomberg take a punch? I mean, Biden fell apart the moment that this notion of electability was challenged and undermined. And it seems that Bloomberg's claim to fame at this point is that I'm the guy that can also beat and go toe-to-toe with Trump. Do you think that's accurate in the way that analyzing it? And by the way, one last point, the money. I mean, we've never seen anyone drop this much money into a race before. Bloomberg may hit $1 billion just before the primary is even over with. So, you know, it's like, do you think, let me say it this way. I don't think Bloomberg can win the presidency. I do think Bloomberg could be a solution that the Democratic Party is using in order to try to kneecap Sanders, or at the very least try to hit him at the convention.
Oh, absolutely. That's absolutely correct. They want someone like Bloomberg because they see that Biden is falling apart literally and figuratively. So they're trying to push someone like Bloomberg up there. And with regards to, you know, the comments that Bloomberg has made and then not really backpedaling or apologizing, but trying to explain them away. I don't think anybody buys them, male, female, or non-binary, is not buying these excuses. And particularly, I mean, I worked in recording studios for 10 years, and those are some of the most male-dominated and concentrated places. And look, I made jokes with a lot of people, and it was very clear where the line was, where it wasn't funny, where you're just being sexist and bigoted. And plenty of guys that I worked with were well aware of where that line is. So this idea that, oh, they didn't get the joke or whatever, no, that people understand humor. It's just that you're not funny, you're just a sexist.
That is that sounds accurate to me. We have quite a few calls to get in here. We're talking about the opioid crisis in the United States, Mike Bloomberg's rise, buying his way to the top, close to the top, nipping at the heels of Bernie Sanders, and much, much more. Whatever's on your mind, 202-521-1320. We start with Daniel from Texas. Daniel, thank you for your patience. What's on your mind today?
Well, I hope that Bloomberg gets annihilated by Sanders, but Sanders doesn't have a spine. I wanted to talk about the opioid crisis for a bit and the clandestine side about it. This man called John Potash, he wrote the book as Drugs as Weapons Against Us, and the CIA Killed Tupac. And he goes into the clandestine side of our drug war, how it's really there, and how it has affected our political system for a very long time. And I hope you have them on the show one day. And good first show.
Thanks, Daniel. We greatly appreciate it. We got a few more calls to get to here. Brandon, we want to hear what's on your mind. Thank you for waiting. What are you thinking about today?
Congratulations, guys. Can you hear me?
Thank you, Brandon. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for calling in.
No problem. Jamal, I've been listening to you for a long time. I used to be called Richard Head on YouTube. You read my comments on your videos a lot. Anyway, just to get to the point, you already know pretty much that Iowa was rigged. It was pretty clear that Buttigieg had nothing whenever he went into there, and he came out rivaling Sanders. That's a joke to expect anybody to believe that. But then you carry over to New Hampshire. There's no way he pulled what he pulled there either. The exit polls don't match what he's got. There's no way in hell that he won that or anywhere near that. They're rigging it. They're using the fractional voting to where Sanders gets 0.8, Buttigieg gets 1.2. At the end of the thing, he pulls out, extra votes, and Sanders pulls out less votes. And if they rig the first two primaries, why would they stop? And then what are we going to do to make sure that this has some kind of integrity? When are we going to get Sanders people up there or, recording it? We can go on YouTube right now, watching steal elections in Chicago back in 2016. You can go on there and watch them steal elections where they got the lady that's recording them, changing the ballots to match the machine instead of the other way around. Like the machine can't have the right answer and the ballots be wrong. The ballots are the right answer. And when she goes in front of the people that asked about it, they say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know you were a professional auditor." Like, dude, you don't have to be to see that you're a freaking idiot. So when are we going to do something about it? Is there anything we can do about it? Because they already proved in court that, that they can pick their candidate in a smoke-filled room. So,
yep. Brandon, thank you for your call. We hope you call back in. I will say, Pete Buttigieg, if you were in Iowa, he did have quite a bit of momentum. If he all of a sudden registers above 50% in the black vote in South Carolina or Nevada, that's when I'm going to be like, they're changing the vote count.
There's a problem with
New
that.
Hampshire, right? Iowa felt more like a systematic kind of just a mess overall. But talking to a lot of people on the ground there was something going on with Buttigieg. Jamal, we want your fuller thought here. We got one more call, though, I want to sneak in from Jared. Jared, you want to talk about Mike Bloomberg. Thank you for calling in.
Hey, thank you, Bob. First, I want to say congratulations to both of you. I have been a longtime follower. Great job.
Thank you.
On Bloomberg, I like that you made your comment about Bloomberg soon to be well over $1 billion spending in this campaign. But I would debate that he has well surpassed that. Because if you look back past couple of years dealing with the Me Too movement and Emily's List, he poured millions of dollars into that group just to, I guess, bypass the notion that he's a sexist or things that he has done. He has fed into the Democratic Party, into different organizations, just to get a third term in his mayoralship. So if you really add in all of these things, it's all a well thought out plan for him to get to the presidency. And I believe he has spent well over $1 billion already, which is nothing but a drop in the bucket to him anyway.
Thank you, Jared.
Jared, thank you for your call.
So we have 367 people. Please like and share this video on Twitter and your other social media. So a few points. So I agree with you with the Bloomberg thing. I don't know about $1 billion that he spent up to this point, but you do have a really good point that part of Bloomberg's energy or his strength is that he can fund candidates all up and down the United States. And he would not even know that the money is missing. And this is an organization, for the most part, that is somewhat bankrupt. What do you have to say about that, Eleanor? You have about 2 minutes.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I think that the spending, the way that we do elections in this country is we buy them, right?
Pretty much.
And I mean, that's Trump has said much the same thing. And it goes even deeper to that, so things like Cambridge Analytica, they basically bragged on their site that they were able to turn elections their way by using social media algorithms and things like that in 2016. So yeah, we use technology, and we use Wall Street. To the caller's point that was asking about what are we going to do, not if but when the Democrats push Bernie out of that primary spot. Something that myself and some other organizers have been working on is a website called burnthednc.org, spelled BERN. So if you go to burnthednc.org, we're basically putting it together to create that groundswell and bring together a bunch of movements and organizations and folks that are frustrated together around the convention in Milwaukee, but also around the nation, to say, look, we know that you've done this before. We know that you're going to do it again, but you're not going to get away with it because the power of the people is greater than that of the people in power. And this is our chance and our time to kind of coalesce around that. Even if you're not a direct Bernie supporter, this is a great time, kind of like what we've been seeing in France, where people can come together in a shared moment from disparate parts of the political spectrum and fight together.
I agree with you on this with one caveat. For the most part, they don't. Do you believe that they're willing to lose to Trump before they lose to Sanders? Meaning they're much more concerned about Sanders than they are about Trump. Because at the end of the day, if this really does boil down to the issue of class, nothing changes from the standpoint of Trump winning, from the standpoint of their class interests. However, those things dramatically change from the standpoint of their political and their economic interests with a Sanders taking head of the Democratic Party.
Absolutely, which is why they were bummed that Hillary lost to Trump, but they were also much more afraid of the prospect of Bernie winning against Trump, which is exactly the same thing here. They would much rather have 4 more years of Trump than a day of Bernie Sanders.
Then how does the plan work in the context of that? Meaning, to get across to the DNC, this is not going to work. You're not going to get away with it. You're going to lose again, etc. When, for the most part, losing is acceptable. This is kind of like the Matrix, where they say, there are some levels of subsistence that we're willing to accept. If this is the same scenario, how is that really holding them accountable? I mean, ultimately, their objective is to stop Sanders by hook or by crook, even if that means using Trump to do it.
Right, absolutely. And I would say this isn't really about the Democratic Party in so much as us asking them to handle the situation. It's basically to tell them to get out of the way.
Fair enough.
And use that people power to demand that Bernie Sanders be the candidate if and when they steal it from him. So it's not about wanting to reform the Democratic Party. I think it was Michelle Alexander who said that it would be easier to just start a new party than to try and reform the Democrats. And I wholeheartedly agree. I'm not out to try and make the Democrats a party of the people. I think that ship sailed a long time ago, if that ship was ever at port to begin with. But I think that this issue is more about basically saying that the people demand this in the same way that we see, in France, the people demand fair pensions, and so Macron has to back off, with the age change there. It's the same concept. It's not saying that, oh, now Macron is a good guy. No, he's not, and the Democrats are not going to be the good guys. But everybody, every power, every powerful system has a breaking point and a threshold that they can't they can't hold on to that power past, and it's up to us, the people, to ensure that they get backed into that corner.
Yeah, we could subtitle that conversation, Why Elizabeth Warren is Failing in the Democratic Primary. That was Eleanor Goldfield, the founder and host of the show Act Out and co-host of Common Censored podcast, along with Lee Camp. Check out Act Out anywhere you listen to your podcast or online, and please support the great work they're all doing there. Eleanor, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Great. We'll be back after this with our review of Uncut Gems, the Adam Sandler movie that was left out of the Oscars, and much more with your calls, 202-521-1320. We're back after this.
We call Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan the most disruptive radio show in America.
It's a great show, and we have a lot of fun.
We come to you live from Washington, D.C. every Monday through Friday morning.
What I like best is that we bring in experts from all over the world. From Barcelona, from Egypt, from Seoul, South Korea.
From Newark, New Jersey. We try to bring people great guests, great calls from our listeners, and, of course, stupid jokes. And we do it with two hosts that have very different viewpoints. Now, here's the thing, Garland. A lot of people would think you and I would just argue. I mean, I'm a Republican Trump supporter.
And, of course, I am a progressive Democrat Bernie Sanders supporter.
The surprising thing is how much we actually agree on.
And you won't be surprised, because you're going to find out just how much you agree and just how much you enjoy this show.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. It is Tuesday, and like every Tuesday at 1:30 p.m., it is time for the Politics of Art segment, where we look at a piece of art, literature, theater, or movies going against the grain. Today, we look at the film and Oscar-snubbed Uncut Gems. Uncut Gems, written by Ronald Bronstein and directed by Benny and Josh Safdie. The movie features Adam Sandler playing Howard Ratner, a once successful New York gem dealer whose gambling addiction has left his family and career in shambles, and him hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. In an attempt to pay off said debt, Ratner's character spirals down a path of chaos and destruction. Let me preface what I'm about to say with, I really, really like this movie, but I hated watching it so much. Every moment of it was agonizing. It was tense. The movie lacked the protagonist. The music throughout was jarring. There were no happy endings to this movie. As Amanda Mull of The Atlantic wrote, Uncut Gems is an incredibly accurate portrayal of how in New York, every room is a little too small, has too many people in it, and none of the door buzzers work like they should. And for all of that discomfort, that is why I really like this movie. It's not your feel-good Hollywood flick where good people turn rotten, go through that rottenness to then turn good again. This movie is harsh, in your face, raw, and honest, and maybe that's why the Oscars chose not to acknowledge it. We're joined in studio by the producer of Political Misfits, Michelle Whitty. Thank you so much for joining our conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Bob.
And, Michelle, you were the first to suggest we review Uncut Gems. You had quite a different thought on it, a movie that doesn't fit with the grain, goes against the grain here. No protagonist, snubbed by the Oscars, Jewish culture throughout without it being like, oh, this is a Jewish movie kind of thing, which was wonderful. Mm-hmm. Curious why this stuck out for you as a movie that we should look at in the politics that revolve around it.
I mean, I was saying to you earlier, I have a pretty basic threshold for if a movie is good or not. It's a sort of pass-fail. And if ever during the movie I think, what time is it and when is this going to be over, then it fails. And I mean, Uncut Gems, it's just a ride, right? Like you go to the theater to go on a ride, and it's an incredible, tense, thrilling, and emotional trip, right? And I thought Adam Sandler did an amazing job at making this extremely unsympathetic character to some of us. I think not Jamarl, but definitely to me, ultimately really sympathetic. Like he pulls off this trick of taking this really crappy guy, and making you root for him so that his heartbreaks are your heartbreaks, at least for me.
I guess I'm Tin Man because I did not have that soft feeling with Adam Sandler at all. If Sandler's goal in this was to make me hate him, then he accomplished that goal in spades. I watched this film, and it's not so much, look, it's not a bad film, so don't misunderstand me in the least. And, you can have films with characters who you don't necessarily like. Just because you don't like the character doesn't necessarily mean it hurts the film, if that makes sense.
Of course.
There's some characters who that's going to be the way you interpret that character. And so it wasn't even, for him to go from comedy to do a film like this. So, yes, I give him credit for being able to run this character, but not an appetizing character at all. And I suspect, look, it could be personal experience stuff. I had a grandfather that was an alcoholic, and having to deal with somebody with that level of addiction, as a family, is painful. And so seeing him go through that and dragging his family into all of that, and I'm like, oh, God, he's horrible. He's horrible.
He's horrible, but this is what I think is really is great about the movie. Like it's populated almost entirely by monsters, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like as you go through the film, I felt like a really telling moment is when his ex-wife, right, who loathes him, the thing that she comes out to say about him is that you're the most annoying man in the world, which I feel like in the hierarchy of criminals, right, and the hierarchy of terrible things to be, annoying is sort of, it's not that bad, Like ultimately he's very annoying. And he's dishonest and all this other stuff, but there are worse characters. And so it's sort of I don't know, I felt like it was really realistic, actually.
Yeah, that's what I thought was great about it. Again, it's like you're looking at a person and there was nothing redeeming about him.
It's wrong.
And I'm so sick of movies having to have some redeeming cult. Like the white guy was an alcoholic and he beat his wife, but like he loved his dog.
Yeah.
And that was great, right? And so this movie wasn't looking. I'm glad that it didn't look for that. I'm glad that it didn't give you this, like, even when he was like, oh, his relationship with his kids, he'll trying to work things out. He still was a huge jerk to the kids. And I thought that was accurate and it was raw, and I appreciate it.
I appreciate that part too.
I wouldn't say that there's nothing redeeming about him. I would just say that it didn't look for like, here's the heart of gold. It was as complex of everything else. He did love his kids.
He did love his kids.
He really loved his kids. It didn't make him not a jerk and not a flawed dad. But I think it's clear that he loves his kids. It's clear that he loves his family.
Yeah.
It's clear that some members of his family love him. His girlfriend loves him.
She does, yeah.
And he loves her. It's messy.
I don't think he's without redemption. Let's say it that way.
See,
and
even though I'm going kids. I don't think he loved any of that. He loved himself.
I think he loved
himself, and then his kids were a secondary thing that he thought by loving himself he should love his kids or love his family. But he sets his uncle up to buy that gem and cost him tons of money and could get his uncle in major trouble. He doesn't love his uncle in that situation because at the end of the day he loved himself.
Can men cheat and love their wives?
Of course.
Exactly. That's my point. Like, you can do horrible things and still love various people in your life and care about. And one of the interesting scene in that film to me was when he finally broke down and he's like, God, man, I can't get, nothing works out right. And you're like, dude, are you serious? You've been doing horrible things. And he's still in this kind of human way of poor me. Oh, nothing works right for me. I can't get this stuff to work right. Missing the point that he screwed everybody over for the last hour and a half within the context of the film. He's still a person. Like, is it his fault? That's the other question.
Mm-hmm.
This whole notion of dependency, chemical dependency, this notion of whether or not this is a medical issue, meaning if you could go and find a tumor in his brain that was pushing him to act in these particular ways, and at that point you can't say it's entirely his fault. By the same token, if you can't find a tumor, can you still go with that assertion? Human beings are weird and complex, and in our particular society, they come on in certain ways. Like I said, I didn't hate the film. I didn't particularly like Sandler, and I agree kind of with no redeeming quality. I think the thing for me that was redemption, if anything, was he was a person. And, when you're looking at him and the way people talk.
And everyone in the movie was a person.
Yes.
And you have celebrities. You have celebrities making
Kevin Garnett.
So good.
Kevin Garnett was great
horrible.
throughout, yeah.
But
you didn't think he was good?
I think he was horrible.
Oh,
no,
Kevin
a
Garnett.
great actor in the film.
Yeah.
But his character was
That was
horrible
the
in that
point,
film.
yeah. That's why the movie, again, they
Yeah,
were meant
no
to be
heroes.
horrible.
There's no heroes in the movie. There's
Yeah,
no
that was
stars,
great.
right? Even the stars that are in there in cameos, they're real. They have terrible qualities. They do terrible things. You also are rooting for them. You know what I mean? You're rooting for him. You're like, make that basket. Get that 3-pointer, right?
Help this guy win his gambling addiction.
Right.
The other thing that I thought was really interesting in some of the politics around this movie has a partnership with Netflix. They first rolled it out to premiere in theaters and limited releases across the country.
Yeah.
It's currently streaming live on Netflix internationally. In the next few months, it'll come to stream in the United States. And one of the reasons this was done was the pushback from the movie Roma last year, which was just on Netflix. It gets rolled out and then it gets nominated for a bunch of Oscars. The Martin Scorsese's, the arts of the world of Hollywood, get on their high horses and say anything on Netflix shouldn't count for awards. It has to have a theatrical release first. And this movie kind of found like a loophole to it. They said, first we'll put it on theaters and then it'll come to Netflix and people can stream it on Netflix soon. Maybe it's just the overblown nature of awards in general, like not mattering whatsoever, or like what's going to happen when more and more streaming companies put out their own movies and how they should be looked at in the critically acclaimed films. Yeah. I don't know if the Oscars snub came because of its partnership with Netflix or why, but I'm kind of curious what you guys think about streaming platforms putting out their own movies and if they should be critically acclaimed the same way as theatrical releases.
I mean, I think The Irishman did sort of the same thing, right? The Irishman was on Netflix, and then so I don't think that
we're past that.
Yeah. So I don't think that necessarily that's a part of the prejudice of the Academy.
No, none of the stuff is real to me. I mean, ultimately, these are awards. Always have technology that breaks through in the way that people analyze and the way people can communicate with this stuff. So it doesn't necessarily bother me that it came out on Netflix if it's just a great film. I mean, all of the films are still, hour and a half, 2 hours long, just like the other films. It's just a comparison between pieces of art. The notion that, this piece of art came out on Netflix, so we don't necessarily want to evaluate it in the same way we evaluate the other one. I don't quite understand that particular argument.
And it does potentially democratize the process in that it's cheaper to have a Netflix subscription than to get even one movie theater ticket.
Yeah, that is true. And they make extremely good movies. I mean, Netflix has done amazing work in regards to the movies that they've been making for the standalones and everything else. So who knew?
Tim Flowbug on our YouTube video says the Academy and the Oscars were founded as a union busting tool. So I'm fine to give them no love or shout outs to them. We're going to take another break before we come back with more fiction, a CBS News piece talking about Radio Sputnik and not telling the whole truth. We got that and hopefully a few more calls, 202-521-1320. We're live in Washington, D.C. on Political Misfits. We're back after this.
By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamarl Thomas, our first ever show live in Washington, D.C. on 105.5 FM, but you also can check us out on Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can check us out on the Progressive Soapbox YouTube channel or on Facebook, Twitter. Get a hold of us. We want to hear from you. We'll be live daily, 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you didn't get a chance to call in tomorrow, don't worry. We'll be back tomorrow if you didn't get a chance to call in today. We turn our attention now to a CBS National News piece that aired last night reporting on us, Sputnik News. We're famous. It's now Sputnik News is now available in Kansas City, Missouri, and that was apparently the story CBS National News ran with. The title of the piece: Radio Sputnik airing in Kansas City. And according to CBS, the news piece looked about how the FBI and other federal agencies are looking for signs of Russian interference in 2020 election, and they, CBS, found it. There we were, Russian propaganda being transmitted on America's airwaves, now in the American Midwest. CBS wasn't the first to find us, though, in Missouri. First, our listeners did. Shout out to the great listeners in Kansas City, Missouri. then the local NPR affiliate, NPR National News, the New York Times, the U.S. Congress, and then CBS National News. To talk about this CBS National News piece and the mainstream bandwagon Sputnik hit pieces that have rolled out over the past weeks, we're joined by Mindya Gavashelli, the D.C. Bureau Chief of Sputnik News. Mindya, thanks for being with us.
Congratulations on the new show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Finally.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Dry runs.
Yeah, thank you for giving us a show here. Trusting with us.
It's great. It's great.
Yeah,
so excited.
So more people for us to anger now that we're continuing to expand at Radio Sputnik. Really proud of the expansion of the work we've done here over the last 3.5, 4 years to roll out this great content that I'm very proud of. Well, we talked about these latest attacks and reports, Mindya, over the last few weeks here at our station. Maybe give our listeners here a little bit of background on these latest kind of set of stories, what led to it. And I think what's most important is how transparent we've been in the process, open and willing for anybody to come interview with us and go on record. But all of these different outlets seemingly aren't willing to follow those kind of same media ethical guidelines.
Yeah, unfortunately. And those are the people who call themselves journalists, even though they are just corporate propagandists. Okay, so to give you some background. We knew that this piece is coming. The reason why we knew, because on Friday, I got an email from an intern, of all people, from CBS saying, hey, guys, we have a story on Radio Sputnik in Kansas City, and we just need a statement from you. So I was like, a statement on what? Like, they didn't even bother to send questions or anything. So my first inclination was obviously to tell them, like, go fly a kite, okay?
Sure.
But then I was like, it's probably not smart.
Sure.
Let's play this game. Let's play this game. So I sent them a statement, and I'm going to read it. CBS is a network whose president, Leslie Moonves, said that Donald Trump's campaign may not be good for America, but it's damn good for CBS, revealing the true face of your propaganda organization. The fact that you didn't bother to interview on camera any of Radio Sputnik's journalists for a story about Radio Sputnik only proves my point.
Yeah.
And I sent it. Well, surprisingly, after that, they realized that, okay, that's probably not a job for an intern. And here comes a big, scary producer who sends me an email saying, like, hey, listen, we need a statement about you broadcasting in Kansas City. Can you do that? And I was like, yeah, I already sent you a statement about us broadcasting in Kansas City. Please be so kind, have it in your story.
That's right. I gave you my statement.
Yeah,
Run it.
Yeah, just read it. You wanted a statement, you got a statement. So they're like, okay. We actually have questions for you. Can you answer them? I was like, well, you guys didn't seem to be interested in sending us questions before. Why change of heart? What's going on here? So she's like, okay. Yeah, like the actual question I have is like, why did you decide to broadcast in Kansas City? I was like, listen, I already sent you everything I had to say. Go, have it.
Yeah, and what's remarkable, as Jamal pointed out earlier today, when we were on Fault Lines this morning, it's CBS National News. They got camera crews in Washington, D.C. They have resources.
The studios are in Washington, D.C.
They
it's
can
not
come
like
here and do
it's
an
hard
interview. Right.
to film it, but I'm just like, okay, it's not the end of the story because, okay, obviously my statement didn't make it to the story.
Sure.
Really?
Obviously. Shock.
They got their quote. They wanted a quote.
They wanted a quote. They got a quote. They never used it. Okay, but what they did is they interviewed the very same woman in Kansas City that is quoted by the New York Times. So, and who's outraged about Radio Sputnik.
That were borderline treasonous.
Yeah. Radio Sputnik in Kansas City. So either there's one person in Kansas City who is outraged by Radio Sputnik, or CBS is so lazy and so inept that they didn't even bother to find someone else. So they are basically stealing, plagiarizing from the New York Times.
Is that normal? I mean, like, is it normal for an organization to call and say, hey, we're a major news network. We would like to do a story on you, but we're not going to send reporters. We're not going to send anybody of value to interview you guys. We're not going to send camera crews to your station. We're not going to do any of that stuff. We just want you to give a statement. Like, I find that to be mind-blowing. And I have to be honest, I didn't know that until I started working here. And you could see some of the hit pieces that they would put out without knowing anything about the network, the channels, or even the host. They would just write slanderous stories. Is that normal in regards to journalistic integrity?
That's a problem. they are not journalists. This is not normal for journalists.
Yeah.
First thing you do, you actually go to the place you are talking about, right? Seeing it with your own eyes and describing it to your readers, listeners, viewers, whoever you work for. But these guys are not journalists, they are propagandists. So obviously they are not doing any of that. And the only thing that shocks me is that someone is still watching CBS. I mean, I know that the audience is dying off, literally.
Yeah.
These are very old people.
We're watching Picard, though.
They might be watching Picard.
Might be watching Picard.
But they got some age on
the
them.
CBS National News. Maybe not.
Yeah, not the news, though.
Sure.
So, you know what? They're complaining about us, but they could have done so much better. Like, there will be no Radio Sputnik if only they covered the issues that you guys cover.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah. And that was my frustration. I produced By Any Means Necessary before I came to this role. And for me, if you want to restore American democracy or civic engagement, for me, it was listening to Eugene Pereira at the time and Sean Blackman talk about the issues in the United States, environmentalism, police brutality, economic inequality, all of these issues. If you actually genuinely wanted to make this country like the best for all of its citizens living here, you would cover all of those issues every day. So just listen to Radio Sputnik. Those aren't the stories that you find on NPR, on CBS National News. And NPR was really the one that kicked this off. And I think that's a fascinating story too. The guy started asking you questions who called for an interview and you simply said, hey, do you mind if we just put this on record? I'm going to go into our studio and record it. So if you take anything out of quote or anything like that, I'll have it. And he wasn't even open to that idea.
Not just he wasn't open to that idea. He categorically said, no, I'm not going to go on the record. I was like, what do you mean you're not going to go on the record?
Journalist.
You
Yeah.
call me.
Yeah.
You ask me for an interview. You're an NPR reporter. You ask me for an interview. I say yes right away. But I say with one condition, it has to be on the record. And you're like, nope, not doing this. I'm like, why? He's like, oh, I'm not authorized to talk to you on the record by my station. I'm like, what do you mean?
You called me.
You called me. You asked me for an interview. You are assigned to do a story about us. And I say, yes, I'm the one who's not asking any permissions or anything. And you are just like, nope, not doing it. I was like, you know what? I'm going to call you anyway from this studio. Just
due diligence.
Just to do my due diligence. Called him 10 times, left him a message. Obviously, he was so scared he would never pick up the phone.
I would respect him more if he said, look, we're just going to slander you. I don't necessarily want to be on the record about this stuff. I just
know
wanted to
that
attack
anyway,
you.
though.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's not like they, like either them or CBS or whoever, like they still can send a crew, do an interview with you, me, Bob, and then edit it.
Yeah.
And pick the part that suits them selectively. This is what the New York Times did. But at least they had a decency to call us, set up an interview. Again, we said, literally the day before the NPR guy, I did an interview with the New York Times. And I told them, well, it has to be on the record. They're like, no problem.
Yeah.
We're going to call you from our booth. You're free to record that. So, we did just that. Obviously, they took the quote that they needed. I get it.
Yeah.
That's fine. But at least they had decency to call, to do a proper interview, to tell us what they think. That's fine. I have no problem with that. I have no problem with adversarial interviews.
Yeah.
I've done tons of them. But that's the problem. These people, they can't do even that.
Yeah. And then the other problem that folds out from this, Jamarl, is the fact that then the Congress gets involved. They read the New York Times. They say, what's going on there? We had to put out a statement. And Democratic Congress members, including Eleanor Holmes Norton here in Washington, D.C., write a letter to the FCC saying, what is going on here? They're not properly doing all the stuff that we're actually doing. If they would actually listen to the station, all of the different things that were required by the Department of Justice, if I'm correct, are noted within there. We're following all the regular. They've already tried to go down this path when we started the station here in Washington, D.C. But now these Congress people, based on an article written by someone that wouldn't even let us go on record, then are making congressional decisions and writing letters to the FCC. What?
Do you remember the first Congress letter? So 3 Democratic congressmen, after we started FM broadcasting in Washington, D.C. in the summer of 2017, they wrote an open letter to the FCC chairman saying that the broadcast of Radio Sputnik influenced the 2016 presidential election.
Oh, wow.
Even though we started broadcasting here in the summer of 2017, so like what, 9 months after?
Yeah.
Like with superpowers like this, no wonder they're scared.
It's so bizarre. And we're open. We're open for interviews. People can come in. We're perfectly welcome. People to this particular channel, if they want to talk to Bob, myself, or if they want to sit here and have those talks, it doesn't necessarily seem they want to engage on that level.
202-521-1320. I hope everyone engages with us tomorrow. Jamal, we did it. We did our first show.
First show.
It's in the book. Mindy Gavaschelli, thank you for joining us. Want to thank all of our other guests, Eleanor Goldfield, for joining us as well. The opioid crisis on our minds. We'll talk more about the Nevada Caucus. We got a debate tomorrow night and much more. Hopefully you'll give us a call tomorrow. This is Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik live in Washington, D.C. Big shout out to Ryan and Michelle in the booth. We'll be back with you tomorrow. See you next time.